The flames roared higher than the trees that night. Neighbors watched in horror as Marcus Reed stood silent, his home reduced to ashes, his life to smoke. And yet, 1 week later, the same woman who set that fire strutted into his courtroom, smiling. What she didn't know was that Marcus wasn't just a man without a home. He was the judge who would decide hers. The house burned bright enough to light the entire street. The air was thick with smoke, the smell of charred wood and melting plastic cutting through the cold night. Neighbors whispered. Phones trembled in their hands as firefighters battled the blaze that had already swallowed everything Marcus Reed owned. He stood motionless at the edge of his driveway, his arms folded, face calm, eyes steady. The flames reflected in his eyes like living memories being torn away, one by one. His neighbors knew him as quiet, polite, and unbothered by the petty rules of the homeowners association. But that night, silence carried more power than any scream could. Across the street, a woman laughed. Her name was Karen Dillard, the self-proclaimed enforcer of the HOA. She'd filed complaints about Marcus for months. His lawn was too natural, his fence too tall, his family gatherings too loud. But none of those words could explain the hatred in her smile as she watched the fire consume his home. What she didn't realize was that she'd made one critical mistake. She burned the wrong man's house. Marcus Reed wasn't just a homeowner. Before he ever bought this quiet suburban home, he had served 20 years in the United States Air Force. He'd flown into war zones to rescue soldiers who never made it back. He'd seen cities crumble and lives vanish in seconds. After returning home, he traded his uniform for a judge's robe, dedicating his life to fairness too, giving others the justice he wished the world had shown him. His home had been his peace, a small, sacred place where silence healed the echoes of war. That night, watching it burn, Marcus didn't rage or curse. He simply stood there, his breath steady, his hands still, as the world learned that some men fight their battles without ever raising their voices. When the fire chief approached, Marcus only said 6 words. Make sure she's charged properly. No anger, no vengeance, just truth. In the days that followed, the town buzzed with disbelief. Neighbors whispered theories, but few had the courage to speak openly. The HOA issued a bland statement about community safety. Karen, meanwhile, walked around as if nothing had happened, her arrogance unshaken. She told anyone who would listen that Marcus's fire had been an accident. But deep down, she knew what she had done. Marcus never appeared in public. He spent his week quietly helping investigators, providing every photograph, every text message, every threat she had ever sent him. He didn't want revenge. He wanted accountability. And then came Monday morning. The courtroom was full. The smell of coffee and polished wood mixed with the tension that filled the air. Reporters waited outside, but inside, it was silent. So silent that even the shuffle of paper felt loud. Karen walked in wearing a pale blue blazer and a smug smile. She was used to having control, used to intimidating her neighbors and bending rules in her favor. But when the bailiff called the name Honorable Judge Marcus Reed, that smile began to fade. Marcus entered, wearing his black robe, his expression calm and unreadable. His presence filled the room not with anger, but with authority earned through years of quiet strength. Karen's laughter from a week ago now echoed only in her mind. For the first time, she realized who she had underestimated. Marcus looked at her not as a victim, not as an enemy, but as a symbol of something larger. The kind of arrogance that believes power lies in cruelty. The evidence was clear. Surveillance footage, witness testimonies, traces of accelerant found near his property, and most damning of all, messages from Karen herself, threatening to make him leave the neighborhood. As the prosecution laid out the facts, Marcus said nothing. His silence filled the room like a mirror reflecting every ounce of shame she refused to acknowledge. When the time came for him to speak, he didn't raise his voice. He simply said, "Justice isn't about revenge. It's about truth." The room stayed still. Karen couldn't meet his eyes. Marcus continued, his words slow, deliberate, and piercing. "You burned a house, but you also burned your own decency. And I hope one day, you understand that ashes don't just come from fire, they come from choices." The verdict was clear. Guilty. The courtroom stood silent as the gavel fell. No cheers, no applause, just the quiet sound of justice landing exactly where it belonged. Outside, as Marcus stepped into the sunlight, a small crowd had gathered. Neighbors who had once looked away now stood in quiet respect. A few nodded, some whispered apologies. But Marcus only looked at the sky, inhaled deeply, and said softly, "Peace isn't given, it's earned." In the weeks that followed, Karen's name disappeared from HOA newsletters. Her power dissolved overnight. The neighborhood she once controlled now found new meaning in kindness. They planted trees where Marcus's home had stood, one for every lesson the fire had taught them about judgment, pride, and quiet courage. Marcus didn't rebuild the same house. Instead, he built a new one, a place open to neighbors, veterans, and anyone who needed a moment of peace. His silence, once mistaken for weakness, had become his greatest strength, because true justice doesn't roar. It stands still until the truth speaks for itself. Iconic quotes to remember. You burned a house, but you also burned your own decency. Peace isn't given, it's earned. Justice isn't about revenge, it's about truth. Asterisk, some people mistake silence for weakness, but silence is where strength gathers its power. Marcus Reed never shouted, never fought back with hate. He let truth do the talking, and when it finally spoke, it was louder than fire. If you believe justice still matters, share where you're watching from in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories that honor silent heroes, the kind the world never forgets. Asterisk.